This slideshow is to accompany Chapter 2 in the textbook, and we're focusing on the features of atoms and the interactions of atoms to produce chemical bonds and molecules, and then the properties of a couple different types of molecules: water, protein, and nucleic acids. There's a representation of an atom there in the lower left-hand corner. And above that, that's not me. I wear glasses, but I don't have a bow tie or any pocket protectors. It's my idea of a chemist. All right, I realize that a chemistry lecture in a human biology course might cause people some anxiety. Biologists and chemists, we are all scientists. We often work on the same things and even work together, but this is a biology course taught by a biologist. It's not chemistry. And so, believe me, chemistry instructors would have a problem with how I teach chemistry. Generally, in biology, we focus on application. Okay, we try and go from applications to abstract things, and we try and limit the amount of abstractions. We're not going to memorize chemical signals, symbols, or equations, and we're not going to do any word problems. We're going to focus on definitions and properties. So chemistry is the study of matter. Matter is any solid, liquid, or gas. Okay. Chemists focus on properties. They focus on the interactions between different types of materials. They focus on the nature of materials. Chemists have found that all materials can be broken down into small particles, and the smallest particles you can break things down with using chemical means are called atoms. And they've identified different types of atoms. All atoms contain 3 subatomic particles. Okay, these are protons, neutrons, and electrons. Atoms, the type of atom is determined by the number of protons an atom has. Any atom that has just one proton in its center is a hydrogen atom. Any atom that has 2 protons is a helium atom, so on and so forth. So it's the number of protons that determines the type of atoms, and that determines a lot of the characteristics. The number of electrons an atom has will determine how chemically reactive it is. Atoms generally like to have a certain number of electrons, and so they may gain or lose electrons to get those preferred arrangements of electrons. So in any atom, the protons are at the center of the atom. Okay, protons are positively charged. They're in the center of the atom. There are also often neutrons, not always, and the number of neutrons can vary. Neutrons have little effect on the properties of an atom other than to add to its weight. Outside the center of an atom, moving around in orbitals or energy levels or shells, are electrons. Electrons have negative charges, and in general, there are certain stable arrangements of electrons: 0, 2, or 8, something like that. Okay, hold your horses now. There's the periodic table of elements. You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to know the symbols. It's just something chemists use, and it helps them remember what atoms have what properties and what other atoms those atoms are similar to. Okay, there are 92 naturally occurring atoms in the environment. The human body only has maybe 20 or 30 atoms commonly. We have lots of hydrogen atoms, lots of oxygen, lots of carbon. Okay, but we don't have them as individual atoms. What we have are atoms that are linked to one another by chemical bonds, and these linked atoms form molecules. Okay, and the properties of the molecules differ from the properties of the individual atoms. Okay, for example, the first type of bond we're going to talk about are ionic bonds. Ionic bonds occur when one atom transfers an electron to another atom. The atoms become charged. They become ions. An ion is just a charged atom. So in, in A up there, on the left, we have a sodium atom and a chlorine atom. Okay, the atoms have the same number of protons as electrons. Okay, but sodium has just one electron in its outer shell, and chlorine has 7. For sodium, it would be more stable to get rid of that electron, and so it does, and it becomes a ion, a sodium ion. Okay, chlorine is more stable if it can pick up an electron, and it becomes a chloride ion. What's really weird about this is then these charged particles interact, they're attracted to one another, they form salt. But the properties of salt are different from the properties of sodium and chlorine. Okay, sodium is a metal. Okay, it's a silver metal. It's very reactive, but it's a metal. Chlorine is a gas. It's a greenish colored gas, but when they interact to form sodium chloride, what they get is table salt, a relatively non-reactive salt. It's different from both sodium and chlorine. It's got new properties. And so this is a molecule or a compound. There's another type of bond, and that's called a covalent bond. In a covalent bond, there's a sharing of electron pairs. And so I have 2 hydrogen atoms down there sharing a pair of electrons. And those shared electrons will orbit the center of both atoms. Okay, and with some types of covalent bonds, we also form hydrogen bonds. So I'll get to that in a minute. So let's look at some covalently bonded molecules. So here we have 3 molecules: hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen molecules. And in this case, neither atom can take away electrons from the other atom. They're the same. And so they share the electrons. In the case of hydrogen, they share 1 pair of electrons. In the case of oxygen, they share 2 pair of electrons. And in the case of nitrogen, 3 pair. That means these electron pairs will orbit both nuclei, and that will form a very strong bond and hold those atoms together. Okay, that's basically it. Ionic covalent bonds form molecules. They hold those things together, and those molecules have different properties than the original atoms. Okay, so now let's talk about some different kinds of molecules. The first molecule is water. In case of water, you have 1 oxygen atom sharing electron pairs with 2 hydrogen atoms. Here they show the water molecules as a red oxygen and white hydrogen atoms bonded together. What's unusual about these bonds between water and hydrogen is that there's a sharing of electrons, but it's an unequal sharing. They are called polar covalent bonds because the electrons spend more time near oxygen. And so that's because the electrons are negative. Oxygen then has a negative charge, or a partially negative charge, and the hydrogens then have a partially positive charge. Okay, and this means 2 water molecules have a tendency to line up and interact so that the negative part of one water molecule is near the positive part of another water molecule. And these weak attractions between 2 different molecules are what are called hydrogen bonds. And they cause the 2 different molecules to want to stick together. And these hydrogen bonds are responsible for some of the unusual and very good properties of water. Water remains a liquid over a wide range of temperature because of hydrogen bonds. Because the water molecules want to stay together, it's good at storing heat, but water is also really good at dissolving things because it can dissolve ionic substances. Okay, it has neat things like cohesion and surface tension that are also good for life. And so all living cells in your body contain water. They have to have water. All living cells everywhere have to have water. In fact, life is tied to water. Okay, on Earth, wherever we find liquid water, we find living organisms. Okay, and it's because of these hydrogen bonds. And so water is really important. And uh, kind of application of this is when people are searching for life, one of the first things they're looking for is water. And so, like the NASA mission to Mars there with the rover, what they're really doing is looking for evidence of water because that's life as we know it needs water. And so they look for minerals that form in water. They look for features that may have indicated water was flowing on the surface of Mars at one time. They look for deposits that might have been laid down in water. And we're finding some examples of that. And that gives people hope that there was, or maybe still are, living organisms there. Likewise, on other places, the moons of Saturn, there's really good evidence of water. And so we have hope that there might be life in other places. Okay. In addition to water molecules, some of the other most important molecules in human beings are what are called organic molecules. They have bonds between carbon and hydrogen atoms, and these are covalent bonds that link carbon after carbon after carbon to not only other carbons but hydrogens. And so this means we can get really, really large molecules that can have really complex structures. Okay, you know many of these molecules. Carbohydrates like glucose, fructose, and sucrose, and starch. These are organic molecules. Lipid molecules like fats and oils. These are organic molecules. We're going to talk about two types of organic molecules, proteins and nucleic acids. And so let's go into those right away. Proteins are organic molecules that are made of amino acids, and there's 20 different types. Each type of amino acid contains nitrogen, and it's easily linked to other amino acids by what are called peptide bonds, and I'll show you a peptide bond. Because different amino acids are attracted to one another because of partially negative and partially positive regions, protein molecules fold into complex shapes. This picture here is a protein molecule that forms a tube in the cells, in the membranes of our cells. And so this complex folding and shaped molecules means proteins have many, many functions. Okay. So first, an amino acid. All amino acids contain a nitrogen group, here shown in green. It has an N nitrogen with two hydrogens. That's attached to a central carbon, C, and that central carbon is attached to another carbon that has an acid group that's got a double bond to an oxygen atom and a single bond to an OH group. All the amino acids look like that. The only thing that's different with an amino acid is that they have a variable group, here listed as an R. And then any two amino acids can interact, forming a chemical bond by giving off water and linking the nitrogen of one amino acid to the second carbon of another. Okay, and so this is how you make long chains of amino acids with the same chemical reaction. Okay, these amino acid chains can be hundreds of amino acids long, and these form proteins, and they can be made into a wide variety of shape. There's just some examples shown there. These shapes are really useful because you can make a molecule to do a specific job. You can make it so that it holds two other molecules together so they form a reaction. Those are called enzymes, and that's called catalysis. You can also make a protein that protects you from bacteria or viruses by binding to the surface of the bacteria or virus. Those are antibodies, and we use them for defense. You can make molecules such that they'll hold another molecule and release it at the right time, and so they're useful for transport. A really great example of that is hemoglobin. It picks up oxygen in the lungs and drops it off in the tissues. Other proteins are made to support the body, and so they form things like hair. Hair is made out of a single protein called keratin. Or they make tendons, which is really a protein called collagen. Other proteins are involved in the changing of a muscle's shape. These are proteins actin and myosin. You don't have to know these examples, but there's lots of them. Some protein molecules are regulatory, like growth hormone. Others are used to store something, like storing oxygen in the muscles. That's myoglobin. And so these proteins, wherever there's a job that needs to be done by a molecule, very often it's done by a protein. Okay. The other type of molecule that I'd like you to know that's an organic molecule are nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are again made up of subunits. Here these subunits are called nucleotides. But nucleic acids are simpler in that their nucleotides have a really kind of uniform backbone of phosphorus or phosphate and sugar. What varies in nucleic acids is that there are 4 different types of bases, and so 4 different types of nucleotides. And we have DNA, which is for heredity, RNA for protein production, and several other types of nucleic acids for energy metabolism. We're going to talk about DNA. In this case, the nucleotide is a double helix. It's like 2 molecules wrapped around each other, held together by, again, hydrogen bonds. And these hydrogen bonds are between the base part of the nucleotide. Okay? Adenine is going to pair with thymine. Cytosine pairs with guanine. They just abbreviate it A for adenine, T for thymine, C for cytosine, G for guanine. Okay. These bases can be in any order, and so it can be in any sequence. And this sequence of bases can be converted to a sequence of amino acids. It's really, DNA is a code for making protein. So we're going to talk a lot about that later and how that code is converted to a protein. But for now, it's enough to just know it's a code. Okay, so we'll stop there. That's all. And there will be one other shorter lecture for this week as well. So it's a lot to look at, but let's give it a try.